Hey everyone, what's up? It's Sarah and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to talk about the horrific, absolutely horrific true story that is the basis for the new Hulu series Under the Banner of Heaven. And Under the Banner of Heaven, the series is based off of Jon Krakauer's book that he published in 2003 of the same name. The book and the show is inspired by the true story of the murders of Brenda and Erica Lafferty. It's a really gruesome crime. This is going to be a just blanket trigger warning for violence. This whole video is going to be talking about the murder of Brenda and Erica. Nothing too descriptive or graphic, but I just wanted to issue that blanket trigger warning.
Ron Lafferty had a revelation that he must kill his sister-in-law, her child, and two others. In 1984, he and his brother Dan carried out that order. They went into the home of their brother Aaron in American Fork. Aaron's wife Brenda was brutally stabbed to death, as was their baby daughter. After two trials, Ron Lafferty was sentenced to die. But over the next decade, he appealed on several issues, including competency.
The show Under the Banner of Heaven is a fictionalized retelling of the true story of Brenda and Erica's murder. There are parts that have been changed for the storytelling purposes. For example, Andrew Garfield's character is not a real person, but he is rather based on all of the law enforcement officials that worked the case. In this video, I'm not going to be working backwards from the crime. We are going to look at the perpetrators, their fanaticism, how they came to be radicalized, and ultimately what led them to commit these horrible crimes. So let's talk about the Lafferty family. Claudine and Warren Lafferty raised their family in Payson, Utah. They were members of the LDS community, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They raised their 6 sons and 2 daughters in the Mormon faith. Claudine was said, I guess, to be submissive to her husband. And from what I've read, Warren seems like a scary dude. For example, he once beat the family dog to death in front of his children. Growing up with Warren as a father, the kids were having seeds of doubt and fanaticism sowed early in their childhoods. For example, Warren really didn't trust modern medicine. One time his daughter was feeling like stomach aches and really severe abdominal pain, and he held off taking her to get medical attention until her appendix ruptured. So he was really hesitant to have really critical medical care given to his children. Also, one time, one of his sons actually shot themselves with an arrow, but this happened on the Sabbath. So Warren actually didn't take his kid to get medical attention until the following day. With all of that being said, and I would say that is childhood trauma that these kids experienced. With all of that being said, one of the killers, Dan Lafferty, remembers his father as a, quote, superb role model. Ron Lafferty was the oldest son of Claudine and Warren, and he and Dan formed an especially close bond. The two of them had similar personalities in that they had short tempers, and they also bonded over their growing distrust of the modern Mormon church. Dan, who was the younger brother, started to believe that the Mormon church made a mistake when it outlawed polygamy, and he really wanted to start practicing polygamy in his own family. Ron didn't necessarily get that same notion, I guess, but accepted that this was Dan's revelation, and lots of revelations come to these brothers. So this was just one inspiration that they felt that they were called to start living polygamous lifestyles. Now, Ron, in accepting Dan's beliefs of plural marriage, ultimately led Ron's wife, Diana, to divorce him and take their 6 kids and move to Florida. So Ron really lost everything, and that we're going to see how that plays in later into the crimes he commits. Ron and Dan were actually excommunicated from the Mormon church in the early 1980s, and they joined a a fringe polygamous cult called the School of the Prophets. After they joined this group, the brothers started growing their hair long, they started growing their beards long, and they just became more and more extreme in their beliefs. Eventually, Ron actually claimed that he communicated with God and viewed himself as a prophet. In March of 1984, Ron received what he called the removal revelation, and this is what it said. Thus saith the Lord unto my servants, the prophets, it is my will and commandment that ye remove the following individuals in order that my work might go forward. For they have truly become obstacles in my path, and I will not allow my work to be stopped. First, thy brother's wife Brenda and her baby, then Chloe Lowe, and then Richard Stowe. And it is my will that they be removed in rapid succession. So this was the removal revelation, but law enforcement officials noticed that this was a list of people that Ron had viewed in doing him wrong. Dan and Ron started out with their removal list with Brenda and Erica Lafferty. Brenda was 24 years old at the time, and her daughter Erica was just 15 months old. Also, Brenda was married to their brother Alan, so this was their sister-in-law and their niece. It is said that Brenda always rubbed Dan and Ron the wrong way. She was not behaving like they had come to expect a good Mormon woman to behave. She was confident, she was independent, she was educated, she was beautiful, and this really just irked the brothers. She also didn't buy into their growing fundamentalism, and she would argue theology with Ron and Dan. Ron also believed that Brenda was behind his wife Diana deciding to leave him, so he blames Brenda for the destruction of his marriage and losing his family. So on July 24th, 1984, Dan and Ron drove to Brenda and Alan's apartment in American Fork, Utah. They also had brought they're called drifters in some of the articles that I read, two other men who waited in a getaway car for them. Dan and Ron forced their way into Brenda and Alan's apartment. There was obviously bad blood between Brenda and the brothers, and she wasn't just going to let them into her house. So she knew something was up. So they forced their way into her apartment. They beat her, strangle her with a vacuum cord, and ultimately slash her throat. Then Dan goes into Erica's room and he slashes her throat as well. Alan Lafferty, when he came home from work and saw the absolute horror before him, knew exactly where to point the police to as far as the perpetrators that did this. Initially, the police took Alan in thinking that he might be the one who perpetrated these crimes, but he actually pointed them in the direction of his brothers because, get this, his brothers actually shared with him their removal revelation, and I guess he just didn't take it seriously. But if the list, I don't know if he knew who was on the list, but if the list included your wife and daughter, I don't know, why did you not alert someone? Ron and Dan never got to finish their removal list, their hit list, if you will. They actually drove to Nevada, where they were apprehended and arrested a month after the murders. Originally, they were supposed to stand trial together, but Ron attempted to unalive himself while awaiting trial, so his trial was postponed and Dan was tried first. Dan actually opted to represent himself, even though he did have court-appointed counsel. He was ultimately found guilty of the double homicide, but the jury could not reach a unanimous decision as to the death penalty, so he was sentenced to life in prison. Ron's legal road to a guilty verdict was not as simple. It was much more complicated. Ron's trial began in 1985, and he actually refused to let his attorneys argue diminished mental capacity. He was saying he was competent and he, was in his faculties. He was found guilty in that trial and sentenced to death. Now, Ron did not let his legal team argue mental illness, but then he proceeded to file multiple appeals citing that he should have been allowed to argue diminished mental capacity. And ultimately, this led to his conviction being overturned and he was retried in 1996. He was found guilty again and sentenced to death again. Ron continued over the years to fight his conviction and his death sentence, even though he always maintained that he felt no remorse for his crimes. He ultimately died in November of 2019 at the age of 78, and this was mere months before he was scheduled to be executed. Now, here are some important things I wanted to note. Brenda's family was initially in favor of the death penalty when Ron and Dan received their initial convictions. Over the years, however, they have come to tire of the legal process, and they're actually now advocates against the death penalty. And I can't say that I blame them. I totally get it. Dan is in prison serving his sentence. He maintains that he is not remorseful at all either, but it hasn't been a constant media blitz and appeal after appeal after appeal like it has been with Ron's conviction, because Ron got the death penalty. And if you just look at the time it takes to exhaust all of the appeals that are afforded to death row inmates, it is a lengthy legal battle. And look, Ron died of natural causes before his sentence could be carried out. And one of the things that I mentioned in the beginning of this video that I just want to reiterate is the show itself, Under the Banner of Heaven, is a fictionalized retelling. So not everything in the show is going to be to the letter accurate. They are going to change things for dramatic purposes. And that is something that is important to note, and something that Brenda's family has actually voiced their concerns over in the retelling of Brenda's story. Also, the book itself and the show really incorporates a lot of the history of Mormonism and how Ron and Dan's beliefs became more fringe and radicalized over the course of time. So that is, there is a historical aspect to the show and to the book. And of course, these fringe and radicalized beliefs ultimately led the mainstream Mormon church to excommunicate the brothers and for Ron's wife to leave him. Additionally, the two remained steadfast in their beliefs until the end, until Ron's death, and Dan still maintains no remorse for their actions. Dan says that he was the arm of God and Ron was the word of God, and they never wavered in their beliefs and never showed remorse for what they did. Another thing that I found while doing research on this story is that Cody Brown's nephew, Benjamin, he has a TikTok and he's actually a comedian. He has done some comedic shows. He talked about Under the Banner of Heaven and his initial reactions to the first episode. I think he's done a couple of these videos, but I found this particularly interesting.
I spent the first 20 years of my life trapped in a Mormon polygamous cult, and I'm about to watch Under the Banner of Heaven. It just premiered on Hulu today, and it's all about a double murder involving Mormon fundamentalists. This is my background. I'm excited to see what they do with this movie and let you know what I think. Episode 1, When God Was Love. That is definitely Utah. That is the Provo Temple. That family prayer scene, spot on. Like every night, that's a Mormon family tradition. Every night you would do that. They are crushing just little details, like right here. You see that looks like a little smile underneath his shirt? That's his garment line. This scene where he calls up his wife to get the addresses for the Laffertys is such a great illustration of how in Utah and in Mormonism, there's this blend of church and state, right? It's fluid. It moves back and forth. It's so fascinating. The Lafferty dad reminds me so much of my grandpa. It's a little bit triggering. Then you might not be as good a Mormon as you think. That line, I think, is going to capture this entire series. I think I'm beginning to see where this show is going. And I think what's happening is that Alan's family was seduced by Mormon fundamentalists, which is basically exactly what happened to my family. Wow. What if it's not some outside evil that found its way here? What if it's us? That cuts right to the heart of Mormonism, because Mormonism, you're taught that the outside is evil, right? That the world is sinful. But what if it's you? What if you're the one creating the harm? What if it's your myth that's toxic? This is going to be a good show.
So Benjamin actually compares Warren Lafferty, Dan and Ron's father, the one who had such a distrust for modern medicine and beat the family dog to death in front of his kids. He compared him to his grandfather. I found that really something to note. And I take Ben, who grew up in a fundamentalist polygamous cult, I take what he says and how he reacts, and he seems to think that this so far is a pretty accurate picture of what it's like growing up in these factions. So far, there's been 2 episodes. The show premiered on April 28th, and it's a weekly series. So there'll be another episode coming this week. So far, I really like the series. One of the things that I find particularly interesting that Ben touched on in his TikTok is that it really shook the faith of the community when the evil was coming from within, when it was one of your own. Now, I'm not saying that it came from within the mainstream Mormon community, but when someone who does something in the name of God commits such a violent crime, it can really shake the foundation of faith for a lot of people. And that is what Andrew Garfield's character really encapsulates. Anyways, you guys, I wanted to hear what you have to say, so make sure you leave a comment down below. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Instagram and Twitter @Reality Squad, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care. Have a good one. Much love.